Hello, Happy New Year, and welcome back to Conservation Voices for the PrimateCast. I'm your host, Cécile Sarabian, and in this cold Inuyama winter, I would like to take you back to Hawaii, where the IUCN World Conservation Congress took place in Honolulu last September. He spent his life fighting for South African wildlife, and he's now on the front line of a movement trying to stop lions being bred for the bullet. Dr. Andrew Venter is the CEO of Wildlands and the executive producer of Blood Lions.
I think South Africa is most probably one of the only places in the world where we breed lions commercially. And we breed them for hunting.
We're talking of 6,000 to 8,000 lions in captivity.
It's not against the law. It's extremely unethical and immoral and against the animal's welfare, but it's not against the law.
Breeding wild animals is no sin.
Part of the story, part of the narrative is brutality.
Every single day in South Africa, at least 2 to 3 captive-bred, hand-bred, tame lions are being slaughtered in canned hunt.
You may all remember or have heard about Cecil the lion, this big, beautiful black male killed in Hwange National Park in Zimbabwe in July 2015. What you may not know, however, is that Cecil's killing was not an isolated incident, but part of the large industry of trophy hunting. Cecil's death provoked massive outrage from the public, but also unveiled the shameful practice of canned lion hunting.
Canned lion hunting is where lion are hunted under conditions where basically they can't escape. The principle of hunting is fair chase. The idea that when you go out, it's you against that animal, and that animal stands, if it's on top of its game, knows what it's doing, it can get away from you. Canned lions are lions usually that are bred, captive-bred, so they've been habituated. They weren't raised by adult lions. They were raised by humans, they were bottle-fed, they were cuddled, so they have no fear of humans. Two, usually released into areas which are not big enough for them to really get away, so from a range perspective. So they're not scared of people, they don't have enough space to get away, and then thirdly, they don't know their territory. So in South Africa it's legal that after 4 days a lion may be hunted, so it'd be released and 4 days later it'd be hunted, and it's simply impossible for a lion in 4 days to learn its territory, to socialize with other animals. So all the criteria for a fair chase, reasons why a lion can get away, fail.
So Blood Lions, the movie, is about the industry of lion hunting in South Africa. But what brought you into the cause?
So personally, I care deeply about Africa's wildlife. I spent my life fighting for it. In this particular case, what really drew me in and drew Wildlands in was that this industry is creating a horrendous reputation for us around the world. It's making us look bad, and it's making it very hard for us to convince the international community that what we do in South Africa is ethical and above board. Because it's so bad and gets such media coverage, and of course we've added to that now, increasingly there's a perception that South Africa is dodgy, that there's something wrong in conservation. So that's why we got involved, is we wanted to sort it out, so we can focus on all the good stuff we do.
All right. So why is it still legal then?
The industry started growing in the late 90s. It was very small in those days, a few people doing it, and they were doing it very quiet, on the quiet, and not illegally, but they were doing stuff that they were doing it silently behind the scenes. Now, in South Africa, we have a very strong legal framework. And one of the principles is you can't simply shut something down that has been in practice for a number of years. So because this industry has been around for 10, 15 years, and it's grown from strength to strength, the industry now has rights, which they can argue in a court of law that they do, that they have as much right to exist as any other industry. So for that reason, it's not just about going and shutting them down. We actually have to demonstrate that they have a negative impact on conservation, one, And then two, we have to demonstrate that there is fraud and illegal activity in the industry. So, for instance, the volunteer piece, we are fighting that to say it's fraudulent. Volunteers are being conned. They're arriving, they believe they're saving Africa's lions. In fact, what they're doing is they're raising lions to be hunted. So we're having to deal with the fraud and the cons in that rather than just stop the industry, which should have happened 20 years ago.
So, I mean, following that, the movie focuses mainly on lion hunting, but it also introduces the alternative motivations for lion breeding, such as you said, so petting lions, walking with lions, or even having your wedding organized around surrounded by lions,
crazy.
Taking pictures with lions, and ultimately perhaps this bone business for traditional Chinese medicine. So do you have any facts?
Yeah, they're massive.
On that?
So we know, for instance, that there are, first of all, about 8,000 lions in captive breeding facilities in South Africa. Interestingly enough, about 2,000 tiger as well, in about 200 facilities. The hunting industry, so the hunting of lions in South Africa generates about 122 million rand, so around about $10 million per annum. It's a sizable industry. It's in the hands of a few people who are making a lot of money out of it. The petting and the tourism side of it, not as clear to define. There's probably about 40, 50 facilities that offer that as an opportunity. The volunteer tourism, massive, probably 1,000 plus volunteers coming to the country each year, paying 10 to 15,000 rand for a 2-week experience. And that's an operation that's growing and growing and growing all the time. So it's an industry that's growing. Having said that, since we launched the film, so we launched the film in July 2015. Since then, we've seen a significant reduction in the number of volunteers coming in. We've seen a number of the petting and walking with facilities closed. We've seen a 50% reduction in the number of lions hunted. So we're hurting that. The piece that we aren't touching is the bone trade. And that's the piece that will be the legacy of all of this, because in this environment, we can embarrass and hurt the market forces around tourism and hunting. We can't do that around bone trade. That market is not easily embarrassed. And so what's starting to happen is more and more facilities that were doing these other activities now are simply breeding lion to be slaughtered. At least 1,000 per annum. We'll probably find now it's closer to 2,000 to 3,000. I suspect this 2016 there'll be a peak because a number of people are moving lion at the moment. Yeah.
How were those facts traced?
They CITES exports, so it's CITES database. So it's very accurate. I would say 99% accurate in terms of carcasses and things going off. Yeah.
Going back to the hunting part, so in the movie, one of the investigators simulates being a trophy hunter, and he goes far as he could into the role. And he bought a ticket for Johannesburg, so he was ready and planned on killing this female lion that he bought for $5,400. There is a wide range of prices, right, according to them. So a young male would be about $16,000 and a big black male would be $40,000. So some of those places guarantee the killing, some others don't, because the park is larger and they have some walking days before encountering those animals. But what do you think is driving the demand for lion hunting?
The first difference is that if you are hunting a wild lion, there's no guarantee. And that's why often you'll do a 10 or 14-day safari because they're large areas and the animals are moving. Having said that, majority, if you're coming out on a 14-day safari, you'll get a lion. The odds are good. The captive-bred market has allowed us to offer discounted lion hunting. So the wild lion, hard to do, very expensive, long time out. Captive-bred allows you to come in and within a couple of days hunt a lion. Now it is actually guaranteed because they introduce the lion for you to hunt into a small area. The bluff is amongst the professional hunters, so the actual your guides. So the guides are convincing the client that it's a hard hunt and they can't find the animal and they don't know where they are. Often they know exactly where the animal is because it's a small property. It's animal doesn't know it's gone into hiding, and so they find it quickly, and then they basically spend a day or two driving you around the property, confusing you until the stage that you suddenly cross the line, and while there's a lion, and then you go into the kill. So there's a whole dramatic performance that goes around that. But what's driving it is cheap lions, and the reality that within that particular community, hunting a lion is one of those ultimate trophies. To be able to talk to your peer group, to your family, you're a real man, a real woman, I guess, if you shoot a lion.
Another issue I would like to bring up here is this confusion between wild animals and pet animals. So in those sanctuary or game reserves or whatever name they have, so as we mentioned, there is volunteering, wedding, taking pictures, and people are ready to pay a lot of money for that. But they, most often, as you mentioned, it comes from a good intention.
Yeah.
They think they are going to be in contact with those incredible animals and they are going to save them. But they don't realize the negative impact that it can have on conservation education, for example. How can we change this approach?
It's something that we question all the time because it's an education issue. It's about people realizing that what they're doing is wrong, and we only will get that right by education campaigns. We, over the last year in particular, have run massive campaigns in this regard, mainly social media and print media, and have had huge success. So there's a much greater awareness. But having said that, there's still a group of people who still do it, and just simply don't believe that there's anything wrong with it. They don't believe that what we're saying is true, because when you go to those facilities, you're told that those lions will not be hunted, that they will be, they'll live to a ripe old age, etc., etc. There's lots of stuff like that. So I think it is. It's an awareness issue. We would love to get legislation in place that would stop it. And I think it's possible in 3 to 4 to 5 years' time, but there's a very strong lobby from those groups not to shut them down, arguing the economic value, arguing the job creation, those sorts of issues.
Yeah, or perhaps putting a legislation in place that for those good sanctuaries that anyway it's a trade-off for them because they might receive volunteers and they will make money out of it. It's a trade-off between receiving this money and keeping a certain ethic regarding their conservation value.
Yeah, it is, and I understand that it's complicated. There's a facility just outside Johannesburg called the Lion Park. It's one of the first facilities to offer lion petting. And they were the target of a very aggressive campaign. They actually shut last year and relocated. And when they shut, they came out with a media release to say they are going to stop the petting of lions. They will simply be a small safari park, so a drive-through zoo, effectively. And they opened this year. They spent a fortune establishing. They opened without petting, and 3 months later they introduced petting because they couldn't make it work financially.
It's a shame.
It is.
At the end of the screening, you mentioned that anyway, even if we make petting, walking, hunting disappear, like we won't be able to control this
lion bone.
Yeah, the lion bone market. How do you look toward the future regarding this?
So that trade model is it has to be controlled by two things. So one, we need the CITES oversight. Now, CITES is not going to block it because it's the breeding of captive-bred animals. CITES, in fact, encourages that.
For the bone market.
For the bone market. Because the argument is that by supplying captive-bred bones into that market, you take the pressure off the wild population. So it's a very twisted argument, but that's the CITES argument, okay. So they encourage you to set up captive-bred facilities to supply wildlife product. The one angle in that, though, is that you can only supply through a CITES mechanism, if it's a CITES 1, if you are what they call CITES registered. So then that requires a formal registration process, which doesn't exist in the country at the moment.
So who delivers the status in the country?
Department of Environment Affairs. So it's the South African government, Environment Affairs. So they would then have to, if lion are uplisted to CITES 1 now, at the CITES meeting, which is a proposal, which is not supported by the South African government, if it was uplisted, then the trade would continue, but every facility that is trading would have to formally register with Environment Affairs as a CITES facility, and we'd be able to lobby into that as to what the conditions of registration are. So we can, at the very least, make sure that the animal welfare issues are dealt with in those facilities, that the lions are reared under the best possible circumstances. That's the one side. The other side is the demand. So as long as there's a demand, there will be a trade. And we know that now against every species on the planet. Limiting trade doesn't stop trade, and CITES 1 doesn't stop trade. It just makes it harder, and it makes it gives you additional teeth. So there's a lot of work going on around many destructive activities. So your shark fin, your ivory, horn, lots of campaigning which are targeting demand, and those are targeting at a source market, mainly China and Vietnam, and arguing that this is not worth doing. That hasn't started around lion yet, and mainly because the lion bone trade at this stage is not impacting on wild lion conservation. The minute that starts happening, then you will see that movement, and there'll be a campaign into China to basically point out to the Chinese that they no longer are getting tiger bone in their wine, because it's called tiger bone wine, not lion bone wine. They don't know that lions are being substituted into that. So that would be the first point, to say you're being cheated on it, and then secondly that it actually has no value and has a negative impact. But we need both those pieces. I don't see any way of simply stopping it, because we're in this crazy situation that the fact that they have traded lion bones for the last 5 years gives them the right to continue doing that in perpetuity by our laws.
So lastly, the movie was released last year. Did it have any societal and political impact?
Yeah, so the movie was launched middle of last year. It was released a week before Cecil was hunted. And so the combination, and I would say 80% the Cecil factor and then 20% the Blood Lions factor, meant that the movie got a lot of attention. And we were able to do distribution deals. It's on TV in 185 countries around the world. It's constantly being screened at festivals all over the world. We've just launched a great program, Youth for Lions, which is targeting senior scholars, university students, volunteers, and effectively getting them to champion the cause and to screen it, and then to share those screenings. So we're getting lots of screening happening. We've also built a very strong campaign, social media campaign and tourism campaign, targeting tourism operators, and getting lots of traction there. So the impacts have been that we've seen a big drop-off in the number of volunteers coming through to facilities that breed lions. It hasn't stopped, but it's probably 10-15% of what it was a year ago. So it's a massive impact there. We've seen facilities close because they no longer have volunteers coming. We've then seen, we launched a campaign called Born to Live Wild, which is a brand that inbound tourism operators into Africa have now signed up on, over 70 of them. These are all the significant European and American inbound operators, as well as the operators in Africa, who basically have pledged that they will not support any animal engagement, so no petting, no walking with, no riding, because we've included elephants into that from a riding perspective. And we know that that's had a big impact on those facilities that are providing, because those are the markets that people come into, and they're now telling their clients don't go there. We had a great breakthrough last year with the Professional Hunters Association, so if you are hunting in South Africa, you have to be a member of the association. And the association came out and said that, this was in October, that they were formally, their language, distancing themselves from the hunting of captive-bred lions until such stage as the IUCN recognizes the conservation value. So the two things we got: one, they've stopped supporting it, they were fighting for it, and two, we now have a motion from the IUCN saying there is no conservation value and it needs to stop. So that really means that it's very hard to argue that there's anything ethically right in that. The other thing that we've now, just a big breakthrough in the last 2 weeks through the IUCN process, is we've engaged with our department, Environment Affairs, eventually, and they have agreed now to do two key things. One, to work with us to formally define canned hunting in terms of legally define it, with a view then that we can put legislation in which prohibits the hunting under canned conditions. Because at the moment, up until now, they've refused to do that because they didn't want to do that, because once you do that, you then stop that industry. Whereas they now have agreed to do that. And then the second thing that they've agreed to do is to formally drive through legislation around the welfare of animals in captivity, which doesn't exist. So to put that in place, so getting those two things is going to make it much easier for us legally to make it harder to run the operations.
If you want to follow the movement or even get involved in the cause by, for example, organizing a screening of the film around you, please visit www.bloodlions.org and follow them on Facebook at Blood Lions and Youth for Lions. This is it for Conservation Voices today. I wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are and hope to talk to you very soon.
You have been listening to the PrimateCast, a podcast series dedicated to the study and conservation of primates around the world. Brought to you by the Centre for International Collaboration and Advanced Studies in Primatology of the Primate Research Institute of Kyoto University. Visit us online at www.cicasp.pri.kyoto-u.ac.jp/news/podcasts and follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/theprimatecast and on Twitter at theprimatecast.